Welcome back to I Now Pronounce You Divorce. This week, we're joined by a very special guest who's going to talk to us about something I think is frequently overlooked in the divorce process, which is weird because it's the largest asset that you're going to deal with. And that's what you're going to do with the marital home, specifically from the mortgage side. So we're joined by Frank. So, Frank, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and go from there.
You bet. Thanks, Charles. So, my name's Frank Super. I'm a producing sales manager here at Rocket Mortgage. Manage a team here in Texas and a couple other states, doing mortgages in this great state for the better part of a decade. And I've seen my fair share of divorced clients, and just like not every lender is created equal, not every divorce attorney is created equal as far as knowing everything then the ins and outs of the mortgage process. So I've had the opportunity of helping hundreds of families during that period of time. So thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, look forward to it. I'm sure that all attorneys have one thing in common. We think we know everything, but maybe not.
Oh yeah.
So what I see frequently from my practice area is we kind of get to the end and people throw their hands up and they say, you know what, why don't we just do a refi? I'll write it into the agreement. You got 30 days to get the refi done, and now it's an enforceable court order. So what other mistakes, I see you shake your head, have you seen people make who are getting divorced where they really regret that housing decision?
Sure. I mean, what comes to mind first is, when it comes to the refinance, if you're already at that point that far along and you just flat out haven't prepared up until then, is when you're buying that property, a lot of the times it's dual income, right, to purchase that house. And if you're going to refinance that house into one individual's name, maybe that individual doesn't qualify for that refinance. And you have a whole nother can of worms that you got to deal with. You can add a cosigner, you know, all sorts of, that's generally what I see a lot of the time.
Frank, whenever we're talking about refinancing and income and dual income, a question is, how does the child support, if child support is awarded, can they consider that as income for purposes of refinancing or being able to obtain a new lender or spousal maintenance or anything like that?
Sure. So, in the circumstances of someone getting divorced, that person's going to be awarded child support, receiving child support. Biggest thing is just 3-year continuance. So the second thing I'm going to look at is just making sure that the date of births of the children that are involved in that case are at least under the age of 15.
Mm.
Because another misconception is, you get the child support order, got a child that's 16 years old. Well, if that's the case and they're going to stop paying at 18, then I can't use it. So 3-year continuance is a big one, but yes, you can use it as long as there's a 3-year continuance. And I have a fully executed divorce decree that it says that as well.
I know when I'm talking to our clients or talking to people getting ready to go through the divorce, it seems like I'm always talking about the same thing repeatedly. Like, hey, go get a list of your assets. Hey, know your credit score before the divorce even starts. Hey, know when you filed taxes the last. What do you find yourself constantly having to talk to clients about who are going through these major life transitions?
Sure. I would say a big one, and I just saw this on one recently. Um, it's kind of hard to be preventative on it, but generally in a divorce, if both clients have access to the same credit cards, or maybe the other one didn't know that they put a credit card in the other spouse's name and wasn't making the payments or whatever that might be, I've seen that before. And so it's kind of hard to be preventative in that way of making sure you have all your ducks in a row before you're getting into the divorce piece. But that's why I think it's just really, really important, especially for divorce attorneys like yourself, to have a partner and just say, hey, you mind taking a look at this? We do soft credit pulls. So we can go and do a soft credit pull with a client well before we start anything just to see, hey, yeah, credit's great. Let's keep that going so that that's not going to be an issue.
And this may be a little bit of a softball for you, Frank, but just because I'm curious, right? I mean, as they're going through this process, I agree with you, having a partner is important, but let's say we send them to you and you do all the numbers and you look at the market and you look at all the things and, the equity or the lack of equity or whatever the situation may be, right? And it really doesn't make sense for them financially to try to refinance. Do you have people that can we basically send them to you and leave it on the line and you can handle everything from there, refer them to an agent, whatever the case may be, so they can move on? Or how does that work?
Yeah, and every situation is going to be different. I alluded to the credit piece. We also have a credit upgrade team who can work to get a credit score higher. And then, of course, if the refinance piece isn't an option, I've worked with several agents here in the DFW area that I would recommend if they have to sell. So you're right, softball, but at the end of the day, it just is case by case.
One of the things I've seen, and people didn't understand this, they would walk out, try to keep a house together and say, hey, we'll refinance in 10 years. So one spouse walks out, nobody said anything about capital gains tax, and then they come and you got a big fight. What are the other problems that you see people face when they try to kick the can down the road too far?
Well, kicking the can down the road too far is just going to lead. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could happen. Y'all didn't bring it up, but um, I think the biggest thing that a lot of divorce attorneys don't think about, or maybe they do, is the oil lien. Um, that has to be a precedent if you're going through equity in a home. Like, it has to be brought up. I think a lot of them just think you can just cash out, refi. Well, what if equity isn't enough? Well, loyalty lien allows you to get up to 95% loan to value because it's considered a rate and term refinance. So that's something I think that's very, very undervalued. That's, hey, there's maybe not enough equity. Well, maybe there's more than you thought that there was. But I kind of went off on that. But as far as kicking it down the road, I think that you might be leaving more equity on the table if the house value is going up. Is kind of what I think of.
So I want to tease that out a little bit more, Frank, because the old lien is definitely something, and I don't know if they have this in other states, Charles. Okay,
Uh,
so this may be a Texas concept. Can you? Yeah, I know. So just for the listeners, right, in Texas, kind of tell me what your piece, right? So I think there's some constitutional rules in Texas about equity and lending, and there has to be a certain percentage in order for us to get it, right? And so I heard you
right.
say 90. Kind of help the listeners understand why it's so important for their lawyer to make sure that they have the lien language in there with regard to what percentage of equity they may or may not have at the time of divorce.
Absolutely, man. Naive of me, and that I'm licensed in one state, and that's Texas, biggest beautiful state we got. But
Yeah.
yeah, so loyalty liens, essentially what that is both parties are going to agree on an equity stake in the home for the person who's not going to be living in the home any longer. Texas is very particular about equity in that we have a state provision called a 50A provision, meaning that you can only take up to 80% of the equity of the home, leaving 20%. However, there's also a different guideline called an F2 guideline, which allows for you to take equity out of your home up to 95%, as long as there's an loyalty lien provision saying, let's just use round numbers, you're going to get $100,000 out of your house when you sell or when you refinance, no matter what, that's going to the ex-spouse. So the first thing that's needed is divorce decree. Second thing that's needed is loyalty lien. And then one of the last things is going through that refinance piece. And again, this is just the importance of having that partner, because how are you going to know what the value of the house is? How are you going to know what the equity stake in the house is? You got to be conservative on those numbers, and both parties have to agree. But for someone who only, let's just say they only have a little bit of equity in their house, you can still take up to 95% of the value as opposed to 80%. So it's a huge difference.
So that 15% uh, uh, leverage we have, at least as divorce lawyers and mediation or in agreements or whatever, really gives us a clear advantage to our client, especially if we get them lined up with a partner. Well, I have one more question for you because it relates to where we're at. When we talk about a deed of trust to secure assumption, right, versus an old lien, okay, do you see any reason why, other than the 95%, that, the difference in the equity stake, do you see any other advantage to one or the other in this process?
To oil lien or deed of trust?
The deed of trust is secure assumption, right? So very often we'll just say, hey, they owe us, they're going to have to refinance in 3 months. I don't want anything out of the house, right? So there's no old lien. I'm just going to do a deed of trust. I'm going to give them 90 days to refinance. Is there anything else we can do to advantage our client with the deed of trust as secure assumption in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, either or. I mean, my recommendation's old lien just because it's a lien against the property. And so no matter what, they can't do anything to the property without that person getting those funds. And then we're getting a little bit more into title pieces. And so I'm going to try to stay in my lane as far as the deed of trust piece. But yeah.
Yeah, I always like putting liens on property. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
It's an easy way to secure something. But liens, bring up liens is a wonderful place where you see, you know, that people didn't know everything, right? They go to refinance, even if they're trying to sell the property, all of a sudden a lien pops up that they should have known about but forgot about, or something else. What are other of the common breakdown points that you've seen when somebody thinks they have a great plan, right? They say, hey, we put this great plan on paper, it's going to execute, and you're like, no, it's not.
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit less common here. The plan, at least that I see, is if you have alimony. Child support is pretty common here in Texas, but I have had plenty of clients that have moved from a different state to here, and it just presents a whole different piece of the puzzle. It's one thing to plug in child support, kind of easy peasy, but I've seen as much as this one client had a 40% of his bonus had to be paid out in alimony. And we actually had gotten decent along into the process before seeing that. Luckily everything worked out. We were able to make it work, but that goes straight into the debt to income ratio that we have to qualify. And luckily it worked out. But yeah, that's a big one that could throw a wrench in it.
Frank, when we're talking about the spousal maintenance or the alimony, right? Even if it's from another state, does the concept work the same from lending purposes? The 3 years. So, as an example, if they don't have income for the next 3 years, you only got 1 year as an example, you would not be able to use that.
So correct. Yeah, they have to have a 3-year continuance. Another one on the flip side of that, though, too. Say your client or my client has to pay child support or pay alimony, but they have a less than 10 months continuance. Then I don't have to count that in their debt to income ratio. So yes, to use either one of those 3 years to not hit it against them, less than 10 months.
And a lot of what we're talking about is trying to combine this legal strategy and reality, right? We're trying to say, like, hey, if we're sitting down and we're trying to negotiate in good faith, that's a legal strategy. But where are the other biggest disconnects you see between our strategy and your reality?
Our strategy and your reality. That's a good question. I guess I would say people just being able to think that they qualify. They think they got all the paperwork lined up. They're going to be able to make it work. And I mentioned the debt to income ratio piece. I mean, you got multiple qualifiers when it comes to buying or refinancing. Debt to income is one of them. So if you think you're making 6-figure salary or 6-figure income and you're going to have to shell out $1,000 a month now for child support, well, that could inhibit the chances of you being able to qualify. So getting all your ducks in a row early. I can't stress that enough.
And what types of, in that regard, how can we be more effective with you in like a partnership, or at what point is it best for you to get involved, right? To make sure that as we go through this planning strategy, how can we partner to make sure that we give the client, right, assuming we share the same client, the most effective solution for their future?
Earlier rather than later. If I'm going to do a comparison, homeowners insurance is pretty stout nowadays. And I work with some really great partners there. And so as soon as somebody goes under contract, I'm sending an email to my client saying, hey, I'm going to introduce you to Steve, and Steve's going to run some numbers to make sure that the income ratio is going to be fine, especially if it's tight. So I might actually flip the question back on you. And that is, you have your initial consultation with a client, but divorce settlements aren't going to happen for a period of time. Maybe after that initial consultation, probably would be the best time of like, okay, kind of got a picture going, but I want you to talk with Frank just to make sure that our plan's fully going to succeed at the end of the day. I mean, it makes y'all look great too. Having an additional partner of, hey, we're going to triple check everything to make sure that it's going to
And I completely agree with you. And I do often try to get my clients involved as early as possible. I think that something that we see a lot is these clients don't realize that this is real and it's happening until
Right.
sometimes they're sitting at the or at the mediation table, and they're like, oh, I haven't even called a mortgage guy yet, right? I don't even know if I can refinance. Let's just go ahead and write it in there. And for us, that can be really difficult. So I think it's important for us to try to get them, like you said, to you as soon as possible after initial consultation. Just go talk to this guy.
Where my mind's going, especially Leland, just because we're here locally. I'm in my office right here. We work in Clear Fork. I don't mind going to you or going to meet your clients. Mostly it's like, hey, you want to make it even more real? I'm not going to give you a phone number and email. Like, let's
Yeah.
actually sit down. I take 30 minutes, an hour out of my day to make that happen. And then they probably feel a lot better afterwards. I mean, they're going
Yeah.
through a lot. So the less, kind of like my educated clients, the more educated that they are, the better I feel at the end of the day. Same with yours. The easier you can make it, the better.
I think that's a great strategy.
Frank, I love that strategy. But one of the things that we're starting to see in some of our offices where the housing market is getting a little bit weaker, right? We
Mm.
saw interest rates go up. We saw the housing market slow down a little bit. Is people trying to prolong, say, hey, we're going to stay tethered to this house. What advice can you give to people that are thinking about doing that?
To staying in the same house or
To stay financially tethered with each other to a house, hoping the market's going to turn around, hoping interest rates will get back down to what, 3%, where everybody's buying them as fast as they could and things like that.
yeah, we actually just turned a corner and there are more people with interest rates above 6% than below 6%. That just happened maybe 6 months ago. But it's not a reality. The way that we got to those low interest rates back in 2020 and 2019, 2020 is not something that we want to go through again. Do you want to go through COVID again? You can go down a whole tangent on that. You got two choices, right? You're either going to stay in the house with that person and be in the same environment, or you can be in a much better spot and out of that situation. Is ultimately like you can try to make, oh, but we can do this and we could, no, those are your options, right? And then you just kind of have to have that reality check, the realization, hey, you're going to have a higher rate right now than your 3% that you're sitting on. A lot of people have the golden handcuffs, but
Wow.
another thing that you might be able to look at that I hadn't mentioned is doing a second lien.
Okay.
So you do have that first lien option. There's a piggyback second lien that you can do as well, to where you're not going to affect that first lien's interest rate. And then you can piggyback that second lien to take that equity out, especially if you have a low interest rate, you qualify with both payments.
Frank, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. A house cannot be understated in how important it is. And the advice that you gave, especially with the OLTD, is one of the things I've been learning more about, I think is amazing. So, what is the best way for our clients to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. And again, happy to be here. So cell phone for sure, 817-673-9334. Or you can reach me on my email, which is franksuper@rocketmortgage.com.
All right. Thank you very much. And for everybody listening, please reach out earlier, but rather than later.